I was standing in the hallway of Pinnacle Entertainment Studios at 7 in the morning, clutching a worn leather portfolio that had seen better decades, when the security guard looked me up and down like I was lost. "You here for the janitor position?" he asked, not even trying to hide his smirk. I smiled back, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Actually, I'm here for the casting director audition." His expression shifted to confusion, then something that looked like pity. "Ma'am, that's on the executive floor. Are you sure you're in the right place?" I was 38 years old, wearing a navy blazer from a thrift store and carrying 20 years of theater experience that nobody in this building would ever suspect. "My name is Rebecca Foster, and I was about to discover that Hollywood's biggest problem isn't lack of talent. It's the people who think they can recognize it." The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like ascending to another planet, one where everyone spoke in codes I hadn't learned and wore clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. I'd driven 4 hours from Riverside in my 12-year-old Honda, spending my last $100 on gas and parking, because this was the opportunity I'd been waiting for my entire adult life. Pinnacle Entertainment was launching a new reality competition show called Director's Vision, where aspiring filmmakers would compete for $1 million development deal. They needed casting directors who understood real people, not just the manufactured drama of typical reality TV. I had that understanding in spades. The waiting room was a testament to intimidation tactics. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Abstract art hung on pristine white walls, and the receptionist looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. She glanced at my appointment confirmation with the expression reserved for expired coupons. "Rebecca Foster, for the casting director position?" Her voice carried just enough surprise to let me know I wasn't what they expected. "That's right. Please, take a seat. They're running a bit behind schedule." By they, she meant Bradley Thompson, the executive producer who'd built his career on turning ordinary people into television gold. His assistant had called me 3 weeks ago after seeing my work with community theater groups across Southern California. I'd helped discover actors who'd gone on to regional success, people who might never have had a chance without someone willing to look past surface appearances. But looking around this waiting room filled with polished professionals in designer suits carrying iPads and talking about their previous work with major networks, I started to wonder if my assistant had made a mistake. 20 minutes passed, then 40. Other candidates went in and came out, some looking confident, others deflated. The receptionist kept glancing at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Finally, she leaned forward. "Excuse me, but I have to ask, are you sure you're not here for catering? We do have some food service interviews today." The question hung in the air like smoke. I could have gotten angry. I could have made a scene. Instead, I laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even me. "Honey, the only thing I'm serving up today is talent recognition, and I guarantee you've never tasted anything quite like it." She blinked, clearly unsure how to respond to that level of confidence from someone wearing Target jewelry. That's when Bradley Thompson himself emerged from his office, a tall man in his 50s, with silver hair, and the kind of casual elegance that screamed expensive. He was deep in conversation with a woman in a cream-colored suit who looked like she could buy and sell small countries before lunch. "The demographic research clearly shows," he was saying, then stopped when he saw me. The woman in cream followed his gaze, and I watched their expressions shift through the same progression I'd seen all morning. Confusion, assessment, barely concealed dismissal. "Rebecca Foster?" Bradley asked, consulting his phone. "Yes, that's me. I think there might be some confusion. The casting director position requires extensive experience with major television productions. We're looking for someone who understands the complexity of finding authentic people who can tell compelling stories under pressure while maintaining their essential humanity," I interrupted, standing up and extending my hand. "Because that's exactly what I do." He shook my hand reluctantly, like he was humoring a child. "Miss Foster, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is a high-stakes production. We need someone with a proven track record in reality television, someone who understands the nuances of manipulation." The words came out before I could stop them, and the entire waiting room went dead silent. Even the receptionist stopped typing. Bradley's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" I said manipulation. Because that's what you're really looking for, isn't it? Someone who can identify people's vulnerabilities and exploit them for entertainment value. Someone who can predict exactly which buttons to push to create maximum drama with minimum regard for the human cost. The woman in cream stepped forward, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. I'm Victoria Sterling, head of development, and you are someone who thinks there might be a better way to make television. Victoria laughed, but it sounded like ice cracking. A better way? How refreshing! And what way is that? By finding people whose real stories are more compelling than any manufactured drama you could script. By recognizing that authentic human complexity is infinitely more interesting than the shallow archetypes reality TV usually depends on. Bradley exchanged a look with Victoria that spoke volumes about their opinion of my naivete. Miss Foster, I think you may have misunderstood what this position entails. We need someone who can deliver ratings, not social commentary. And I'm telling you, those don't have to be mutually exclusive. I opened my portfolio and pulled out a photograph. This is Jenny Rodriguez. Single mother, works 3 jobs, putting herself through nursing school while raising 2 kids. Most casting directors would see her as struggling mom, good for sympathy votes, eliminate in episode 4. I saw someone with unshakable determination and a strategic mind that could outthink contestants with Harvard MBAs. Victoria glanced at the photo dismissively. And did she? She won the regional theater competition I cast her in, beating out 37 other contestants, including 2 professional actors. Because I recognized that her experience managing impossible schedules and solving problems with limited resources had given her skills that looked like magic when applied to creative challenges. Regional theater is hardly the same as national television, Bradley said, his tone growing colder. The stakes are completely different. The stakes are always high for the people involved, I replied. The only difference is the size of the audience watching their dreams either come true or get crushed for entertainment. That's when Victoria stepped closer, and I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something that felt like barely restrained contempt. Ms. Foster, I think we've heard enough. This position requires someone who understands that television is a business, not a therapy session. We need hard results, not feel-good philosophy. Then let me tell you about hard results. I pulled out another photo. This is David Park, a janitor at the community college where I teach part-time. Quiet guy, never spoke up in groups. Most people assumed he was just there to clean up after everyone else. But I noticed he was always listening, always watching, and when I finally got him to audition for a play, he delivered the most nuanced performance of guilt and redemption I've ever seen. And? Victoria's voice dripped with impatience. And 3 months later, he was cast in an independent film that got picked up by Netflix. The director said David brought an authenticity to the role that they'd never seen in traditional auditions. That film just got nominated for 3 Emmy Awards. The room had gone quiet again, but this time it felt different. Even the receptionist had stopped pretending not to listen. Bradley cleared his throat. That's impressive. But casting for scripted content is very different from reality television. We need people who can generate conflict, create alliances, deliver the emotional beats that keep audiences engaged week after week. You need people who are real, I said simply, because audiences are tired of the same recycled personalities playing the same predictable roles. They're hungry for genuine human stories, for people who surprise them, who make them care about outcomes that aren't predetermined by focus groups and demographic research. Victoria's smile had disappeared entirely. Miss Foster, I think you're fundamentally misunderstanding what makes successful television. Audiences say they want authenticity, but they actually respond to heightened drama, clear heroes and villains, storylines that fit familiar narrative structures. What you're describing sounds like a documentary, not entertainment. What I'm describing is the future of reality television, whether you recognize it or not. I put the photos back in my portfolio, but kept my eyes on both of them. Audiences are getting smarter, more sophisticated. They can spot manufactured drama from a mile away, and they're starting to resent being manipulated. The shows that survive the next 10 years will be the ones that trust viewers to engage with complexity, not the ones that spoon-feed them the same tired formulas. Bradley was shaking his head. Miss Foster, I appreciate your passion, but nothing I've said fits your preconceived notions about what a casting director should look like, sound like, or think like. The words came out steady and clear, carrying 20 years of being underestimated by people who confused credentials with capability. You took one look at me and decided I didn't belong here. You've spent this entire conversation trying to find polite ways to dismiss ideas you never intended to seriously consider. The accusation hung between us like a challenge. Victoria's composure finally cracked slightly. That's quite an assumption, Miss Foster. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already made your decision, and this conversation is just a formality you have to endure before you can get back to interviewing people who look the part. Bradley stepped forward, his voice taking on a warning tone. Miss Foster, I think this conversation has run its course. We appreciate you coming in, but you're not interested in someone who might challenge your assumptions about what makes compelling television. I zipped up my portfolio and slung it over my shoulder. That's fine, but before I leave, let me tell you something that might save you from making the biggest mistake of your career. They both stared at me, clearly expecting me to storm out in defeated frustration. Instead, I smiled. The real smile this time, the one that reached my eyes and carried with it the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was worth. The demographic you're really missing isn't about age or income or education level. It's about people who've been consistently underestimated by systems that judge potential based on surface characteristics. Those people have developed skills, perspectives, and resilience that your typical reality show contestant lacks. They know how to navigate complex social dynamics because they've had to fight for respect their entire lives. They understand strategy because they've had to find creative solutions to problems that privilege never prepared them for. And when they succeed, audiences don't just root for them, they see themselves reflected in that success. Victoria and Bradley exchanged another look, but this time it carried a different energy. Uncertainty, maybe. Or the first flicker of recognition that they might be missing something important. And more importantly, I continued, they're the audience you're trying to reach. The people who work multiple jobs, who've been passed over for promotions they deserved, who've watched less qualified people succeed because they fit someone else's image of what success should look like. When they see someone like themselves not just competing but winning, they don't just watch your show, they become invested in it emotionally. They talk about it at work, they argue about it with their friends. They create the kind of organic buzz that no marketing budget can buy. The waiting room had become an audience. Other candidates who'd finished their interviews were lingering. The receptionist had given up all pretense of working, and I could see Bradley's assistant peering around the corner. But you can't cast those people if you don't recognize them when they walk through your door. If you're so busy looking for polished performers that you miss the genuine articles sitting right in front of you. I adjusted my bag strap and took a step toward the elevator. The next person you interview probably has a more impressive resume than mine. They'll use the right industry terminology, reference the right shows, give you all the answers you expect to hear. And they'll help you create the same kind of forgettable television that gets canceled after one season, because it feels exactly like everything else on the air. Bradley opened his mouth to say something, but I wasn't finished. Here's what I know that your other candidates don't. Authenticity isn't something you can fake or manufacture or script. It's something you recognize, and you either have the eye for it or you don't. I have that eye. I've spent 20 years developing it, not in corporate boardrooms or network offices, but in community centers and high school auditoriums and places where people show up not because they want to be famous, but because they have something real to say. I pressed the elevator button and turned back to face them one last time. You want to know what my credentials are? I can walk into any room, anywhere in this country, and within 10 minutes identify the 3 people who will surprise you, the 2 who will break your heart, and the 1 who will change how you see the world. That's not a skill you learn in film school or pick up from industry connections. That's a talent you're born with and spend a lifetime refining. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that seemed to break whatever spell had settled over the waiting room. I stepped inside and turned to face Bradley and Victoria, who were still standing there looking like they'd been hit by something unexpected. But here's the thing you really need to understand. I said as the doors began to close. The person you're looking for to cast your show? The one who's going to surprise everyone and make your ratings soar? They probably don't look like what you think a star should look like either. And if you can't recognize that potential in someone standing right in front of you, how are you going to find it in a field of thousands of applicants? The doors closed, and I was alone with my reflection in the polished steel, watching the floors count down as I descended back to ground level. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. If anything, I felt calmer than I had all morning. There's something liberating about speaking truth to power, especially when, that power has already decided you don't matter. I'd said everything I came to say, and more. Whether they listened was up to them. The lobby was busier now, filled with the mid-morning energy of a working studio. People hurried past with purpose, talking into phones, carrying scripts and coffee, and the weight of important decisions. I walked through them like a ghost, invisible in my thrift store blazer and Target accessories, just another face in the crowd of Los Angeles dreamers. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A text from my neighbor. How did it go? Still on for dinner tonight? I stared at the message for a moment, considering how to answer. How had it gone? I'd basically told one of the most powerful entertainment executives in Hollywood that his approach to television was outdated and morally questionable. I'd accused his head of development of prejudice and challenged their entire business model. I had walked out of what was probably my only shot at breaking into the industry I'd been trying to enter for 2 decades. By any conventional measure, it had been a disaster. I typed back. Better than expected. Definitely still on for dinner. I'll cook. Because the truth was, it had gone better than expected. Not because I thought I'd get the job. That ship had sailed the moment I opened my mouth about authenticity versus manipulation, but because I'd finally said out loud what I'd been thinking for years about the entertainment industry's inability to see past its own assumptions. As I drove out of the studio lot, I caught a glimpse of the building in my rearview mirror, all glass and steel and perfectly manicured landscaping. It looked like the kind of place where important decisions got made by important people, where careers were launched and dreams either came true or died professionally choreographed deaths. But it also looks like the kind of place that would miss a diamond in the rough because it was too busy looking for stones that were already cut and polished. My phone rang as I merged onto the freeway. Unknown number with a Los Angeles area code. Probably a telemarketer, but something made me answer. Rebecca Foster. Miss Foster, this is Angela Torres. I was in the waiting room this morning when you had your conversation with Bradley Thompson. I remembered her. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a nervous energy that suggested she understood what it felt like to be the outsider in rooms full of insiders. Oh, hi. I hope I didn't make things awkward for your interview. Actually, you made things perfect for my interview. Her laugh was warm and genuine. I went in there after you left, and all Bradley could talk about was whether I agreed with your assessment of reality television. He seemed genuinely shaken by what you said. I hope that didn't hurt your chances. It didn't hurt them at all. In fact, I think it helped. But that's not why I'm calling. She paused, and I could hear traffic in the background. I'm calling because I've been trying to get a project off the ground for the past 2 years, and I think you might be exactly the person I need to make it happen. I felt my heart skip slightly but tried to keep my voice neutral. What kind of project? A documentary series about people who've succeeded in ways that nobody expected. Not the typical rags-to-riches stories, but more complex narratives about individuals who found their own definitions of success, despite systems that were designed to overlook them. Now my heart was definitely racing. That sounds like something I'd be very interested in. I thought it might. Look, I know you probably think this is some kind of consolation prize after what happened this morning, but I've been following your work for months. The community theater competitions you've organized, the talent showcases you've put together, you have exactly the kind of eye I need for this project. I pulled into a parking lot because I needed to focus on this conversation completely. Following my work? How? My daughter participated in one of your theater programs 3 years ago. Emma Torres? She played Lady Macbeth in your Shakespeare in the Park production? I remembered Emma immediately. A shy teenager who'd auditioned with a barely audible voice and transformed into a powerhouse performer, once she found her confidence. Emma was incredible. How is she doing? She's a sophomore at UCLA now, majoring in dramatic arts, and she credits you with helping her find her voice. She's told me repeatedly that I need to find a way to work with you. The pieces were falling into place in a way that felt almost too perfect to be real. Angela, are you saying you were at that casting call this morning specifically to meet me? I was there for a legitimate interview. Bradley is considering me for a producing role on Director's Vision, but yes, I was hoping to run into you. I just didn't expect to witness you delivering a masterclass in courage and conviction before I got the chance to introduce myself. I sat in my car in a random parking lot, watching ordinary people go about their ordinary lives, while my own life took a turn I never could have anticipated. Tell me more about this documentary series. It's called Hidden in Plain Sight, and the premise is exactly what you talked about in that waiting room. We follow people whose talents, insights, or achievements have been overlooked by traditional gatekeepers, but who found ways to succeed on their own terms. Each episode focuses on a different person, but the through line is about questioning our assumptions about what success looks like and where we expect to find it. The more she talked, the more excited I became. This wasn't just a job opportunity. It was a chance to put my philosophy into practice on a scale I'd never imagined. And you think I could help with casting? I think you could help with everything. Casting, yes, but also story development, interview strategy, understanding how to present these people in ways that honor their complexity, instead of reducing them to simple narratives. I closed my eyes and tried to process what was happening. 6 hours ago, I'd been a part-time theater teacher with a crazy dream of breaking into television. Now I was being offered a chance to create the exact kind of programming I'd always wished existed. Angela, this sounds almost too good to be true. I know. But here's the thing. I've been struggling to get this project funded precisely because executives like Bradley and Victoria don't believe audiences want this kind of content. What you did this morning, challenging their assumptions so directly, it clarified something for me. I've been trying to sell this project by making it sound like everything else on television, just with different subjects. But what if instead I sell it as something completely new? What do you mean? What if I stop trying to convince traditional networks and start looking for partners who are already committed to different kinds of storytelling? Streaming platforms, independent distributors, organizations that are specifically looking for content that challenges conventional wisdom? The idea was brilliant, and I told her so. You're talking about finding an audience that's already hungry for what you're offering, instead of trying to convince an audience to develop an appetite they don't have. Exactly. And based on what I witnessed this morning, you understand that distinction better than anyone I've ever met. We talked for another 20 minutes, sitting in our respective cars in Los Angeles traffic, planning a television series that might never get made but felt more real and important than anything I'd ever worked on. By the time we hung up, I had her email address, a promise to send her my portfolio and references, and a tentative meeting scheduled for the following week to discuss the project in detail. More importantly, I had something I hadn't possessed where I woke up that morning, a sense that speaking my truth, even when it seemed professionally suicidal, had opened a door I never could have found by staying silent. The drive home to Riverside felt different than the drive in. The same freeway, the same traffic, the same 12-year-old Honda with its slightly off-center steering wheel and broken air conditioning. But everything else had changed. Not because I'd gotten the job I went after. I was pretty certain Bradley Thompson would never call me back, but because I discovered that the job I went after might not have been the job I actually wanted. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, working in her garden, the same way she had every afternoon for the 6 years I'd lived next door. She waved, and I waved back, and for the first time in months, that simple exchange didn't make me feel like I was stuck in a life that was too small for my ambitions. Instead, it made me feel grounded in a community of people who saw and valued each other, which was exactly the quality I'd been talking about in that waiting room. My phone buzzed with a text from Angela. Just sent you some sample episodes from similar series. Can't wait to see what you think. I looked at my little house with its postage stamp lawn and decade-old furniture, and instead of seeing evidence of dreams deferred, I saw the foundation for something new. A place where I could build the kind of career that aligned with my values instead of requiring me to compromise them. That evening, over dinner with Mrs. Rodriguez and her husband, I told them about my day. Not the version designed to elicit sympathy or admiration, but the real version, complete with my own doubts and the moments when I wondered if I'd been too honest for my own good. You know, Mr. Rodriguez said, refilling my wine glass, in my 40 years as a teacher, the moments I was proudest of weren't the ones when I gave the expected answers. They were the ones when I said something that needed to be said, even when I wasn't sure how it would be received. His wife nodded. The students who remembered me 20 years later weren't the ones who heard me repeat the curriculum. They were the ones who heard me speak from the heart about what I really believed. I thought about that as I walked home under the streetlights, carrying leftover homemade tamales, and the warm feeling that comes from being truly understood by people who matter. Maybe the measure of a successful day wasn't whether you got what you came for, but whether you stayed true to who you are in the process of trying to get it. My phone rang as I was getting ready for bed. Unknown Los Angeles number again. This time I answered with curiosity instead of caution. Rebecca Foster. Miss Foster. This is Bradley Thompson. I nearly dropped the phone. Mr. Thompson. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I imagine not, given how our conversation ended this morning. His voice was different somehow. Less performatively confident, more genuinely thoughtful. I've been thinking about what you said, and I wanted to ask you a question. I sat down on my bed, trying to process this unexpected development. Okay, you mentioned a janitor who ended up in an Emmy-nominated film. David Park. Can you tell me more about that story? It wasn't the question I'd expected, but I found myself settling into the telling of it. David had been working at the community college for about 3 years when I started teaching there. He was always polite, always professional, but never engaged with the students or faculty beyond what his job required. Most people didn't really notice him at all. But you did. I noticed that he paid attention. When we were rehearsing plays in the theater after hours, he'd find reasons to be in the building. Cleaning classrooms that didn't really need cleaning, taking his time with tasks that could have been finished quickly. At first, I thought he was just being thorough, but eventually I realized he was listening to our discussions about character motivation and story structure. And you invited him to audition? Not immediately. It took me months to work up the courage because I was afraid I was wrong about what I was seeing. What if he was just killing time during his shift? What if he had no interest in theater and my invitation made him uncomfortable? But finally, we were casting for Death of a Salesman, and we needed someone to play Willie's neighbor. Small part, but crucial for the emotional climax of the play. Bradley was quiet for a moment. What happened when you asked him? He said he'd been waiting 2 years for me to ask. The admission hung between us over the phone line. 2 years? 2 years. He'd been hoping someone would notice that he was interested, but he'd never felt like he had permission to speak up. Said he figured people like him didn't get to be in plays, they just cleaned up after the people who were. And his audition, best I'd ever seen for that role. He understood Willie's neighbor from the inside. The frustration of watching someone self-destruct, the helplessness of wanting to help, but not knowing how. He brought a depth to the character that wasn't even in the script. I heard Bradley take a breath, like he was preparing to say something significant. Miss Foster, I owe you an apology. You really don't. Yes, I do. Everything you said this morning about making assumptions based on appearances, you were right. I took one look at you and decided you didn't fit my image of what a casting director should be. I dismissed your ideas because I was more focused on protecting my own preconceptions than listening to what you actually had to say. The apology was so unexpected and genuine that I felt myself tearing up. Mr. Thompson, Bradley, please. And let me finish because this is important. He paused, and I could hear voices in the background. After you left this morning, Victoria and I interviewed 6 more candidates. All of them were exactly what we thought we wanted. Experienced, connected, fluent in industry terminology. And every single one of them gave us the same answers, the same approach, the same vision for the show. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be sorry, because you gave us something none of them could. What was that? You gave us a mirror. You made us look at what we were really asking for, and what we saw wasn't pretty. We weren't looking for the best casting director. We were looking for someone who would validate our existing assumptions and help us create the same tired content we've been producing for years. I was having trouble processing this conversation. The Bradley Thompson talking to me now seemed like a completely different person from the one who dismissed me that morning. Bradley, what are you trying to tell me? I'm trying to tell you that we want to completely reconceive director's vision based on your feedback. Instead of looking for contestants who fit predictable archetypes, we want to find people whose stories haven't been told yet. People who've been overlooked by systems that judge potential based on surface characteristics. The irony was overwhelming. You're offering me the job? I'm offering you the chance to reinvent what this job could be. Not just casting director, but creative consultant. Help us identify not just the contestants, but the entire approach to how we present their stories. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at my quiet neighborhood where Mrs. Rodriguez's porch light was still on and someone was walking their dog under the streetlights. Bradley, I have to ask, what changed your mind? Victoria did, actually. That was the last answer I'd expected. Victoria? After you left, she told me something I hadn't expected to hear. She said you were the first person in 5 years of development meetings who'd challenged her thinking instead of just agreeing with her ideas. She said disagreement that comes from genuine conviction is infinitely more valuable than agreement that comes from wanting to please. I almost laughed. She said that? She said that, and she also said that if we're going to create television that surprises people, we need to start by surrounding ourselves with people who surprise us. You certainly did that. The offer was everything I thought I wanted when I drove to Los Angeles that morning. Creative control, financial security, a chance to implement my philosophy on a national stage. But something was holding me back, and it took me a moment to identify what it was. Bradley, can I ask you something? Of course. If I hadn't given that speech in your waiting room, if I'd been polite and deferential and told you what you wanted to hear, would you be making this offer? The silence stretched long enough that I knew the answer before he said it. Probably not. Then you're still making the same mistake, just in reverse. What do you mean? You're offering me this job because I surprised you, because I didn't fit your expectations, but that's still making decisions based on how people perform in artificial situations, rather than recognizing their actual capabilities. Bradley was quiet for a long moment. I think you might be right about that. The truth is, I probably would have been a good casting director for you even if I'd played it safe this morning. My experience with community theater, my eye for authentic talent, my understanding of how to present people's stories with dignity, none of that changed based on whether I was willing to confront you about your assumptions. So what are you saying? I'm saying that if you want to change how your show approaches casting, you need to change how you approach everything. Not just looking for contestants who surprise you, but creating an entire production process that values substance over flash, authenticity over manufactured drama. I heard him talking to someone in the background, probably Victoria. Ms. Foster, Rebecca, what would it look like if we did that? It would look like the most radical experiment in reality television in the past 20 years. It would mean trusting audiences to engage with complexity, trusting contestants to be interesting without being manipulated into conflict, and trusting yourselves to create something that's never been done before. And you'd be willing to help us do that. I looked around my small bedroom, at the stack of community theater programs on my dresser, and the framed photos of students who'd found their voices in my classes. And I felt the weight of a decision that would change everything about my life. Bradley, I need to think about it. Of course. Take all the time you need. Actually, I don't need time to think about whether I want to do it. I need time to figure out whether you really want to do it. I don't understand. This conversation, this offer, it's happening because you were shocked into reconsidering your assumptions. But shock wears off. Tomorrow morning, you're going to wake up and remember that I'm still the woman who showed up in a thrift store blazer and challenged your entire business model. You're going to wonder if hiring me is a brilliant innovation or a moment of temporary insanity. Bradley laughed, but it sounded rueful rather than dismissive. You might be right about that too. So here's what I propose. Give me a week to put together a comprehensive plan for how this show could work if we fully committed to the approach I described. Not just different casting, but different storytelling, different production values, different ways of measuring success. And you spend that week really thinking about whether you're prepared to make a show that might fail spectacularly because it refuses to follow proven formulas. And if we both decide we're ready for that kind of risk, then we make television history. And if we decide we're not, then I go back to my community theater work, and you go back to your traditional casting, and we both know we were honest about what we wanted. Deal, he said without hesitation. I'll have contracts drawn up for a 1-week consultation, and we'll see where we go from there. After we hung up, I sat in my dark bedroom for a long time, trying to process the strangeness of the day. 12 hours ago, I'd been preparing for what I thought might be the most important audition of my life. Now I was preparing for what could be the most important project of my life, with the same people who'd dismissed me that morning. But the real surprise wasn't that they'd changed their minds about me. It was that I'd discovered something about myself in the process of speaking my truth, that I was willing to walk away from opportunities that required me to compromise my values, even when those opportunities represented everything I thought I wanted. And somehow, that willingness to walk away had created possibilities I never could have imagined when I was focused solely on getting what I came for. As I finally got ready for sleep, I thought about David Park, the janitor who'd become an Emmy-nominated actor. The parallel wasn't lost on me. We'd both been invisible to systems that couldn't see past surface appearances, and we both found ways to succeed without waiting for permission from gatekeepers who never intended to notice us. The difference was that David's breakthrough had come through someone else recognizing his potential. Mine had come through refusing to accept other people's limitations on what that potential could become. Tomorrow I'd start working on a plan that could change reality television forever. Tonight, I fell asleep in my own bed in my quiet neighborhood, surrounded by the life I'd built while waiting for my big break, finally understanding that the break had been there all along. I just needed to be brave enough to create it for myself.